the topic we're discussing, like I mentioned, is grain bin safety, and we have had a rash of these. This site is all too common anymore, and we're going to address some of the issues. 2014 is not off to a good start. These are the Google alerts that I've received over the last couple of months. January 8th, we had a rescue in Nebraska. January 9th, we had a double rescue in Indiana. January 20th was a recovery, a fatal in Illinois. And January 24th was another fatal recovery. That was in a rail car in Michigan. We had January 31st, a rescue in Illinois. February 3rd, a recovery in Minnesota. February 10th, a recovery in North Dakota. And February 11th, a rescue in Minnesota. So like I said, it's not looking good for 2014. Here's the actual articles that those Google alerts hit. So this is that one in Nebraska that was an injured employee. So that was a rescue. And then these two brothers, they were rescued in Indiana in January. This guy, he's got a great quote. There's no good reason to go in. This guy was in Illinois on January 31st. Here's another rescue in Minnesota on February 11th. And here's some of the body recoveries. This one's in Illinois, January 20th. This one's in Michigan. This is the rail car one on January 24th. Here's the Minnesota one on February 3rd. And this one's in North Dakota on February 10th. And this one I throw in there, this is a 2013 claim or loss, but it happened because of air quality. And if there's one thing we get some pushback from on the bin entry requirements, it's the monitoring for air quality. And this one was a result of lack of oxygen. So there's just no option. You do need to check air quality before you go in these bins. Here's some of the data that Dr. Field, Purdue, has compiled, and I think Wayne Bauer included it in the latest Grain Journal as well. So that's a great resource for some of this information. When you see the trend line, we were on the right track. 2010 was the worst year based on the grain quality issues we had in 2009. A lot more bin entry translated into a lot more accidents. Out of condition grain is by far the leading cause of these entrapments and engulfments. Here's the by-state comparison. The gray boxes include the total number of incidents, and this is a 40-year period of time. The white boxes are the 2012 incidents. So you can kind of see the Corn Belt states are responsible for a lot of these type of incidents. For those of you keeping score at home, the two leading states are Iowa and Indiana had a resounding lead, but the last 2 decades, Iowa's really come on strong. So these are the two states that are the biggest offenders on these type of claim or these type of accidents. We're on track for a near record 54 entrapments if the pace keeps going the way it is today. Who's at risk? Pretty much everyone's at risk. It's hard to profile an employee that is at risk for a grain engulfment. We have the inexperienced workers who don't recognize the hazard. They simply haven't been around it long enough to gain an appreciation for the danger. And then there's the seasoned veterans who become complacent. And I've actually seen more of these seasoned employees become complacent than I have of the young employees that didn't have the proper training or weren't aware of the hazard. Here's a definition I put together for complacency as it relates to grain bin safety, and pretty much any exposure at your grain operations. The more time you spend dangerously close to a recognized serious hazard and are not injured, not only do you not recognize the hazard, you actually feel safer than when you're in an unfamiliar setting absent of any recognized hazard. That sounds a little far-fetched, but this is the only way we can explain what's happening out there. And I kind of look to my history growing up on the farm, and the nearest complacency example that I can think of that's kind of an extreme case are corn picker accidents. And here's kind of a shameless plug for my my dad and his farming operation, but I grew up on a farm, and well into the 70s, we picked ear corn, and we didn't have a corn picker like this, but he's actually restored this one, and it's workable. It works, and it's a very dangerous machine. And here's just a section out of that operator's manual. The snapping rollers travel at 12 feet per second, faster than you can let go of the stalk when it begins to enter the machine. Keep your hands out while equipment is running. I can't imagine a more obvious hazard, and yet we had so many of these, so many farmers that got killed and seriously injured in corn picker accidents, and they just got too comfortable around them. And I knew 4 farmers in the area that I grew up that were between my dad and my grandfather's age who had farmer's hooks, and they were injured doing the same darn thing. So certainly number 2, number 3, and number 4 knew that their neighbor had been seriously injured doing exactly what they were about to do, but they did it anyway. So for me, that's a very good example of complacency, and this is what plays out at your facilities with your longer-term seasoned veteran employees. Another problem I think we have with our commercial grain operations is information overload, and we just share so much information and have so much training that we provide that I think the real important messages get somewhat watered down. There are 63 program topics that OSHA requires of us. 53 of them have initial training requirements. 28 of them require annual training. 12 of them have other periodic requirements, and all of them require retraining if you have any changes to your facility or your program. And this is kind of a far out example or a metaphor, but my wife thinks I'm a hoarder. I think I'm a collector. Her definition is a little different than mine, but she makes me watch this television show when it's on. And this guy has a quote that I think is pretty profound. He says, "When everything's important, nothing's important." So I think a little bit of what's happening out there is we do so much training on so many different topics, the real important stuff kind of gets watered down, and we need to do what we can to emphasize the importance of the serious risky activities that our employees are asked to do. Another type of complacency that I see is organizational complacency. It's frustrating for me when I'll call on a prospect or a customer and we'll be talking about their safety culture and their safety program and them be pretty happy with where they're at. I'd much rather talk to somebody who is anxious to improve, who is never satisfied with where their safety culture is, and who has adopted a continuous improvement philosophy. And this goes beyond safety. This has implications within your production environment, certainly with your employees and your organization as a whole. So really give some thought to continuous improvement philosophy within your safety culture and your safety program. Your safety culture, your people are your greatest asset. Do they know it? Have you made it clear to your employees that they are your greatest asset? Do the leaders in your organization, do the managers, supervisors, safety committee members act with passion for safety and compassion for your coworkers? That's a critical piece to this. You need your employees to feel like everybody is rooting for them. Everybody wants them to succeed. And likewise, you want to instill in your employees that they have confidence in their supervisors and want their supervisors to succeed as well. So it's kind of a win-win. If you display a passion for safety and a compassion for coworkers throughout your organization, your safety culture will definitely improve. Let's get specific to grain storage hazards. There are 3 main hazards with grain storage facilities. The first and most common is entrapment, engulfment. It can be caused by bridged or hung up grain. This is where grain quality is such a big deal. Flowing grain can be flowing by the reclaim system running, or by an avalanche by walking down the grain, or simply by the grain settling. The second hazard is entanglement, and this is a pretty obvious one. We got sweep augers in there, and that's a whole other issue for another day. A fairly obvious hazard, but there's complacency with sweep augers as well. And then there's the reclaim auger in the floor of the bins as well, or the conveyor. The last one and least common is the atmospheric conditions, and this is the toxins, the dusts, or the absence of oxygen. And in that Waverly case, it was the absence of oxygen. So for prevention, the key to this is eliminate entry. You got to have a very sound grain quality program. And you've got all sorts of help from your land-grant universities, and you've got consultants, and you've got very talented people on staff that can help with the grain quality program. Technology, there's great monitors of temperature that are available. And here's just an example on the right. They can be set up to be monitored remotely. You can have automatic aeration fans that turn on based on time, temperature, humidity, both inside and outside of the grain bin or the storage facility. So be quick to adopt this technology. It could save you a lot of headaches and hassle going forward. And it's not just a grain quality issue, it's a safety issue as well. Keep that grain of good quality, and you'll have less reason to go in the bin and less problems with plugging at the bottom of the bin. Another prevention technique that is very important and can't be overlooked is zero entry sweeps. We've had a lot of technology improvements over the years, and there's tractor drives, and there's belt type and paddle type sweeps that are very effective and very good. And this is an investment in a couple of things. First, to make your operations more efficient, and it also shows your employees you're serious about safety, and it keeps them out of the bin. So zero entry sweeps are a big plus in my book. Another thing that I think is sometimes overlooked and often overlooked are perhaps using some sump guards. There's a commercial on this. I think Brock markets this one on the upper right as a well guard, I think is their trade name for it. This one on the bottom left is a homemade one. I think this kit is like an FFA kit or something from South Dakota or North Dakota, just using some rebar and some sickle sections welded on it. And this lower right one, this is actually a hydraulically driven paddle that rotates, and if anything plugs, you just hook that to some hydraulic source and move those paddles and remove the plug or the choke. I'm leaning toward a commercially available one. Be a little worried about some object, knocking off a sickle section, and then you have tramp metal in your grain stream. So I'd encourage you to go with a commercial unit. But you think about it, all the force, you've got thousands of pounds of force pushing down on that out of condition clump of grain. It's going to force it through these blades, if you will, and it's going to break it up enough for your auger to get to it, or your conveyor to get to it, or for it to move through the transition and go through your grain flow. So give some serious consideration to these sump guards. Here's some more prevention tips. These slides actually I saw for the first time at Jeeps when it was in Wichita. I can't remember if that was 09 or 10. Ed Kleinwert from St. Ansgar Mill showed these. Ed is an EMT as well, so he's responded to a few of these situations. So he understands how important it is to remove bridged grain and get it into the grain flow. This is just a cordless drill with a rod on it with a bend in it. You put that through any small hole in a transition or in a hopper bottom sidewall or anything without causing destruction to the tank or the bin. You got some access panels on transitions in your concrete elevators and in some of your tunneled grain bins. So that's a great little quick tool to use to restore grain flow. Here's a stir stick idea that he came up with in a hopper bottom ingredient bin. Came up with some bearing flanges that fit perfectly around the ball from a trailer hitch and made a swivel stick. Great way to stir that product that was giving him problems caking up and not flowing. So there's another idea. This one is particularly innovative. A lot of your older bins don't have tunnels underneath them, so you can't get to the sump or discharge hole to clean out a plug. He's built a rake. This pivots on a rod that extends to the outside of the bin and is parallel to the reclaim auger. It's got a lever on the outside of the bin, so he can just swing that arm, that moves those forks up and down through the grain and removing any plug or debris. Another thing you really need to spend some time with is classroom training. Raise awareness of what's going on out there. There's a lot of companies that specialize in this or develop some of these tools and training yourself. We've got a tilt table here on the upper left. This demonstrates angle of repose and engulfments. We've got a little model here that simulates grain flow, and it actually engulfs little dolls that they use. And just any type of classroom training is going to increase awareness. There's also some great videos that are available. We've got a new one coming out from Grain Handling Safety Coalition. And this one I don't think is released to the general public yet, but it'll be coming out soon, so watch for that. It has to do with harness and lifeline, and it's a great hands-on demonstration via video, and then you follow up with actually going out into your facility and practicing with the equipment yourself. Roberta's Request has been around for a while. Garden City Cooperative in Kansas. It's available on YouTube at that link, and it's the story. Roberta's actually the widow, and it's the story of her husband who was actually the chairman of the safety committee at Garden City Co-op, and he did a dumb thing. He went in and broke up a clump and ended up costing him his life. It's a very powerful video. There's also grain bin safety, protecting yourself and your family from the National Corn Growers and American Feed and Grain Association. That's available on YouTube as well. It's a great video. And the last one that I've got listed here is grain bin safety from Oklahoma State, and that's again a great video. They all three have similar yet different messages, or they all four have similar but different messages. So please, secure all four. If you want a flash drive or something of them, let me know, and we can work on that as well. Also, a lot of information available through the Grain Journal. Wayne Bauer at Star of the West Milling has done more to raise awareness about bin safety and engulfment prevention issues than anybody. He's literally written dozens of articles that have appeared in the Grain Journal over the years. The most recent edition includes 2 of Wayne's articles, one about grain bin anchors and another about the entrapment summary that I mentioned earlier. Wayne included that in the most recent issue of Grain Journal as well. And then Ed also has an article in there about the rescue collaboration that occurred in Indiana. We had 2 safety directors or safety coordinators who responded and helped rescue those two guys in Indiana, those 2 farm kids in Indiana that were trapped. So it's nice to read about that story. Grain Journal also hosts conferences and they host webinars, so there's a lot of safety information available on their website. So please, by all means, check them out and use them as a source for information. Here's some materials that I've developed. Here's a storage data sheet for stored grain. Your employees are used to looking at these safety data sheets for their chemicals and other hazardous materials. So I put one together that kind of follows the same format. So this will be available to you as well. Use it as you will. It's just an awareness tool. Whether you use it as a toolbox talks or whether you use it as part of a formal classroom setting or a payroll stuffer. Whatever you want to do with it, it's just good information that hopefully will help battle some of that complacency that you have in your workplace. Here's page 2, going to the acute health effects, chronic health effects, and toxic atmospheres. Just again, good basic information in a format that they're used to seeing. Another thing I don't think we talk enough about is angle of repose. And this example is assuming a 90-foot diameter bin, which is pretty common. We've got some 130s out there now, but pretty common in today's world. And an angle of repose for good grain is anywhere from 26 degrees to 15 degrees. And in a 90-foot diameter bin, just that difference from a typical angle of repose is 10 feet. So you start that little avalanche of grain, and it can actually result in a 10-foot change in the center of that bin. And when you think about it, if you're the person in that bin, you're starting out close to at your knees. If you're standing in grain, you're going to be well under the surface of the grain, just in good grain. And that doesn't account for any product hanging up in the sidewall or any clumps of spoiled grain that might be changing that that angle of repose. So this is something I think too you need to bring up with your staff or with your employees. Another thing I firmly believe in is participating in simulated entrapments. And these are available. There's several companies now that hold these safety training sessions, and very worthwhile to participate in. Once you've been buried armpit deep in grain, you never, ever, ever want it to happen to you again. Very claustrophobic, very scary situation, and this is in a controlled environment. So this is something you should host for your workers, host for your farmers, and get more information out to your people. So we've talked about not going in the bins. Now we're going to talk about what you need to do if entry cannot be avoided. These are the safe procedures that must be followed. Lock out equipment, check air quality, use a harness and lifeline, dust mask to prevent any contaminants from entering your lung, and having an attendant. This is a critical piece, and then documentation of the activity. Locking out hazardous energy sources. This is pretty obvious. Yet the one thing I do see is quite often companies will forget the loading equipment, the leg or the conveyor that fills the bin. They'll lock out the reclaim and the sweep auger, but they may not remember to lock out the incoming grain flow. So make sure that all gets documented. And then you have to have machine-specific lockout procedures and document the process, and make sure you've got padlocks for every entrant, keep the key in their pocket, and have everything tagged appropriately. Air quality, and again, this is something that really came to the forefront in my mind with the Waverly fatalities last year. You cannot enter a bin unless you verify that you've got enough oxygen in there. Also need to monitor for flammable toxic vapors, and we're concerned about dust too. We don't want to inhale any moldy dust that's going to cause issues down the road. And causes are spoilage, mold, welding, fumigants, and certainly if you find an issue, start your aeration, turn that air over, and get levels where they need to be, and then continually monitor while the entry is going on. Here's some reminders. We've got these signs available through Berkeley Ag, and why not? Why not post these on your bins? Just one last reminder. You've given your employees your training. You've explained everything to them. You've provided them all the right tools and equipment to enter the bin. Let's just remind them one last time. And if they are going in under a complacency type situation, maybe they'll have reason to pause and think about what risk they're facing and what it might mean to their loved ones if they go in without following all the procedures. This is just another example of a sign. This one, the Grain Handling Safety Coalition has kind of put together, and OSHA's kind of pushing this one as well, so it's available. Here's just a graphic description of the harness and lifeline, and here's some pictures of it actually in use in a grain bin. These are just screenshots from the Grain Handling Safety Coalition's harness and lifeline video that's coming out here fairly soon, and it just does a good job of showing you what's involved and what the process takes. The attendant has some very important duties. One is the communication, has to be in constant communication with the entrant and have communication to initiate the rescue. Also monitors that anchor point and keeps slack out of the lifeline. Here's the equipment you need. You need an air monitor, you need a full body harness, you need the passing pulley so that you can attach that attachment point, that anchor point at the top of the bin, because if you anchor on the sidewall or at the side manhole at the eave, you've got that pendulum effect. You cannot successfully keep someone out of corn if you're attaching from the sidewall. Okay. You also have lifeline, Prussics or other belay device, dust mask, and obviously communication, whether that's radio, hand signals, or what. And then the completed and signed permit. That's an important piece of this as well. Prevention. The equipment, you can use your regular vendors. I'm sure they have access to a lot of the safety equipment you need. If you want to look at some online vendors, Granger does have a lot of this equipment, and there's rescue response companies as well that provide gear for first responders that have a lot of this type of equipment fairly reasonably priced. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about leadership. An important part of any organization is leadership and the culture that the organization has. And I feel leadership has three main components, at least when safety is concerned. You need clarity, you need to set a good example, and you need to have optimism. And my example here for clarity, this is a quote from John McClelland, who is the general manager at Garden City Co-op in Kansas. And this quote is actually taken from Roberta's request. I think it very succinctly and clearly explains John's position on safety. Plan for inefficiency that will cause an employee to slow down and not put themselves at risk. If you can't do it safely today, then we'll wait till tomorrow. I don't know of another way to say this, and this is from a guy who's been there and back. This is an experience you don't want to have, so let's do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. Here's some other issues you need to think about. The written procedures and classroom training are not enough. We need hands-on training. Your workers learn from doing, and it's a great opportunity to get them out there and practice what you're preaching in the classroom. So hands-on training. You need them to demonstrate to you that they know how to do it correctly. And then you also need them to sign off that they understand the penalty for not following the procedures. Okay, you also need to make sure employees understand the rescue training and cofferdams are not intended for them. They're rather as a public service to area farmers that might get themselves into trouble. Store the cofferdams at the fire department, not at the grain facility. And there's some debate about this, but honestly, I do not want the cofferdams sitting in a warehouse where they might get damaged, they might get, used for something else. They're going to get, hidden by storage of other materials or equipment. Keep them at the fire department. The fire department's going to be involved in a rescue anyway, and then they're easily accessible if they go out on a farmer call, which is quite honestly much more likely than you guys needing them after you've done the training and worked with your employees like you should. The last thing there is during rescue training, put your operations people, put your grain people in the grain. Make them experience that feeling so that they're less likely to use bad judgment going forward. As far as example, management should go through the same training, including the hands-on portion. Nothing is more team building than for an employee to see the management taking it as seriously as they're asking the employees to. So participate in that training. Also, make sure your employees know that they are empowered to stop unsafe behavior and report unsafe conditions. So if they see someone or something doing anything wrong, regardless of rank, they can stop. They can call the person out on it and correct the situation. The last bullet there, if you open up a bin and you find a real mess, you find out of condition product hanging up, if nothing's flowing, bring in a salvage company. Yeah, it's an expense, but then you're not putting your employees in a hazardous situation. And those salvage companies are used to hazardous situations. Now, you still have to oversee them, and you have to make sure they're following all the safety guidelines and rules that you would for your own people, but they're used to that kind of thing. So please, by all means, bring in a salvage company to take care of a situation that could put your employees in harm's way. Some more things you can do as a leader to show the importance of this topic. Post links on your website to safety videos. Like I said, these are YouTube videos. They're available to the public. How great is it for the farmer to be able to just click on a video and be able to see that, hey, the company that I do business with cares about me. Also consider some public service announcements. Local radio stations, in conjunction with the Farm Report, you guys are probably putting ads with them anyway. Add a little safety component to it. So give that some thought. Also, discipline policy, and this is a tough one. I mean, nobody wants to, fire an employee over the fact that they're working extra hard, and a lot of times, from the employee's perspective, yeah, they might be breaking some rules, but by gosh, they're doing it with good intentions. But you have to have a very clear discipline policy. And the discipline policy should also apply to witnesses of unsafe conditions. If an employee witnesses something and they don't stop it, they have some accountability there as well. And the last bullet there is document employee reprimands. You can't take action further down the road unless you document some of the initial issues you have with an employee. So start that documentation process now and make sure it's very clear to the employee what's going to happen next time if they keep violating the safety rules. So some more leadership requirements. Observe bin entries. Work with your first level supervisors and grain operations folks and actually attend and participate. Be the attendant during a bin entry. Show your skills and show the employees how important it is that it's done correctly. The next bullet there is auditing records. And I've got an example coming up that shows a bin entry permit that was not filled out correctly, and there was a history of this kind of thing. So make sure you're auditing records. Pay attention to completed bin entry forms. Watch for missing information and signatures, and praise your people when they do it correctly. Make sure that you know, like I've always heard, praise in public, criticize in private. Hold people up when they're doing things correctly. But by the same token, when they don't do it correctly, retrain them, but do it with care and compassion. Make sure they know that you're not punishing them because you want to punish them. You're punishing them because you care for them and you want them to go home safely to their loved ones. And then this last bullet, pay special attention to overachievers. Far too often, it's our overachievers that are involved in these situations. You know full well they wouldn't have sent, Skippy or some, lesser experienced employee into that situation, but they have that complacency and they think they can get in and get out and get it done. And so all too often, it's the overachievers that we all recognize as overachievers. So we know who that group is. Let's pay some special attention to them and give them some additional love and let them know how important it is that we keep them safe and out of harm's way. Here's that filled out permit that I talked about earlier. This one resulted, this bin entry resulted in, I think, about an 8-hour stay buried up to his neck in soybeans. It was a concrete silo with a slope bottom, and the soybeans were a little bit out of condition, so they were having trouble with it plugging at the transition. So these two employees went in, or two employees filled out this form. We did have an attendant, we had the entrant, but we had no supervisor authorizing this entry. They did use the harness and lifeline, but they left the reclaim equipment running. This poor guy, like I say, got buried up to his neck. He spent 8 hours in that silo. A lot of medical conditions come with being, compressed for that period of time in the bottom of a grain bin. So in this whole groupthink thing, I have 5 kids. 3 of them are boys. I see this groupthink phenomenon all the time. The 3 of my boys can come up with the craziest ideas and do a lot of damage, much more than they could as individuals. We have that same experience at your facilities. If you have 2 or more employees involved in a decision, they can come up with a solution that is worse than any of them would have thought up on their own. This is no exaggeration. So be cognizant of that and don't leave situations unsupervised where this kind of a groupthink situation can occur. So like I started mentioning on this entry permit, and there's no legal requirement to maintain these, to hold on to these permits after the entry is completed, but I ask my customers to keep them for 1 year. Just keep it rolling. You get past a month, take last year's month of permits out of your binder and keep it kind of cleaned up. So you just have 1 year of these records. But I need to audit them. Your insurance company wants to see them. Your management needs to see them. I'm even a proponent of faxing them or scanning them and sending them to a central office to kind of keep track and monitor how they're being completed and what's going on with them. It's very important documentation to review and make sure it's filled out correctly. And in this specific case, we had an attendant outside the manhole we had harness and lifeline, and here's the way they filled out the form. Lack of oxygen, not applicable. Engulfment and entrapment hazard, not applicable. Not applicable, the reclaim is running. So we had serious issues with this. And there were 5 permits in the file from previous bin entries that looked exactly like this one. So if we had audited these, if someone had looked at these, we might have been able to prevent this situation from occurring. Okay, finally with leadership, optimism. And this one too is kind of a tough one, and I don't want to criticize anybody out there running a grain facility. It's tough work, and you guys have so many obstacles and so many things going on and so many things to worry about. But you're sending some mixed signals. I'll attend safety meetings, and the manager or the owner will get up and say, hey, I know it's a pain, but OSHA requires us to do this. OSHA doesn't let us do this anymore, so we have to do it this way. You're sending mixed signals. To a lot of employees, breaking the OSHA rule is taken as a challenge. They're not for some of the things that OSHA's been pushing on them. So they'll take that as a challenge, and they might exhibit some characteristics and some behaviors that you don't want. Don't blame it on attorneys or lawsuits. Your employees, I'm sure they think a lot of you, but they're probably not going to worry too much about the fear that you might go to jail over something. I shouldn't say that. They probably care for you more than that, but don't blame it on attorneys or fear of lawsuits, and don't blame it on your insurance company. The only reason for working safely is out of concern for everyone's health and well-being. This is the message you need to make to all your employees. This is the message your safety committee needs to deliver. This is the message your location managers need to deliver. This is the message that all of your first-level supervisors need to deliver. The only reason for working safely is out of concern for everyone's health and well-being. So in summary, complacency is a big hazard out there for you, so fight complacency. Share an abundance of information, more information than you ever thought necessary to fight that complacency. It's a very real situation. You can't be there for every employee act. You don't have supervisors that can be everywhere. You have to provide as much information as you can so that your employees do the right thing. Continuous improvement of your safety culture through strong leadership. And again, leadership from clarity, setting a good example, and being very optimistic. So with that, I'm going to close with this John McClellan quote again. I think it's just a great way to close this. Plan for inefficiency that will cause an employee to slow down and not put themselves at risk. If you can't do it safely today, then we'll wait till tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time and attention.